Hello friends! Today I wanted to talk about a little video game series which pretty much consumed 6 years of my life and wasn't made by Blizzard Entertainment, although a certain MMO which shall remain nameless might get a video of its own somewhere down the line. Let us rewind back to the golden days of 2011. I was a young-ish man, 22 years old, living alone for the first time and honestly getting a little tired of video games. I still played them for want of anything better to do, but this was before the real rise of the indie market and all we were being gifted by the mighty AAA sphere was an endless sea of COD clones and Ubisoft sandboxes. I guess nothing really changes there, does it? Anywho, one evening, a friend of mine comes round for a takeaway and video games night and brings with him this fancy new game from Software. I had seen another friend of mine play a little Demon's Souls and I'd seen a Yahtzee's review on it, and being something of a casual, read that as bad, gamer, I decided it wasn't for me. As such, I went into Dark Souls expecting to have a bad time and be done with it after 15 minutes. Now, I'm not wrong very often, but I was young and naive back then, and goddamn was I wrong about this game. Dark Souls killed me. A lot. It kicked my legs out from under me, stamped my face into the curb and drew a dick on my unconscious face. It wasn't exactly a new experience for me since I grew up with the SNES and Master System and their own brands of merciless sadism, but what made Dark Souls different was the drive to push on. The game almost goaded me to go back for one more try because although it was harsh and although it was punishing, above all it was fair. I felt that my failures were down to my own stupid mistakes, panic chugging my Estus flask or trying to squeeze out another soul arrow instead of rolling. It must have taken me 20 tries to get to the Taurus Demon, and when I realised I had to fight a boss without even being given a free checkpoint, I despaired. I thought I'd never do it, but the panic induced by the fear of losing all that progress was one hell of a rush. Funny story, my first victory against the Big Daddy Bull came in my third or fourth attempt, and it came as a result of the stupid horned meat cube leaping from the battlements. Well, I just rolled around him in panic. Anyway, my love for the game grew as I realised how many options it gave you, how well it all linked together. Finding the lift from the parish back down to Firelink Shrine brought forth a girlish squeeze of happiness. Discovering a route through the Darkroot Garden in the Valley of the Drakes, which allowed me to bypass the worst of the Blighttown horrors, allowed me to progress even when I thought the game had my number. Giving up on Sen's Fortress and finally exploring the graveyard brought me to the Catacombs and the Tomb of Giants. It granted me the right of kindling, which in turn saved me a lot of pain down the road. I adored delving into the lore of this game and coming up with my own little theories on how it all fit together. This was a game which offered practically nothing in the way of forced narrative, but every tiny nook and cranny carried with it a compelling and complicated backstory just waiting to be discovered. Oh look, I found a Darkmoon Seance ring on the statue of a woman in the catacombs. Could that be Gwyn's wife's tomb? Oh hey, the statue of the Sunbro Covenant carries a spear like Ornstein's. Could he be related to Gwyn's firstborn somehow? Oh look, the cleric armour is lying around on a ledge halfway down a cliff. This must be Patch's work. Everything was a hint, everything meant something to us. It was a great time to be playing the game, and I honestly feel sorry for anyone who missed out on all that. Anyway, long story short, I played the game a lot, like a lot. I did challenge runs, I PvP'd, I spent hours trawling the internet for fan theories. It was all I did for months. And then the PC version came out, and I bought that half-broken mess of a port again at full retail price, just so that me and my friends could play the game online together. And when Dark Souls 2 was announced, we just collectively lost our shit. We had waited for the best part of 3 years to get a sequel to the hottest shit on the market, and as such the hype train for that game was immense. Even when we realised that it had been handed off to the B team in favour of some other mysterious project. The teaser footage looked great, the leak sounded amazing, Dark Souls 2 was a dead cert to be the best thing to ever happen in gaming. But of course it wasn't. When a game is as immensely influential and revered as Dark Souls, any sequel, no matter how good, is going to be a letdown. And in the interim between the two games, I had gone back and played through Demon's Souls, and while I still think that game nails it, with the atmosphere, the level design and the lore, the disconnected hub world system and the somewhat lackluster boss fights left it standing in the shade of the mighty Dark Souls. And what did Dark Souls 2 have when it finally came out? A disconnected hub world system and an army of lackluster bosses. Great, fucking A. Here's the thing, backtracking can be egregious, but in a world as richly detailed and downright enjoyable to explore as Dark Souls, I don't mind trekking back across old ground to uncover new secrets and areas. So being not only able but actively encouraged to teleport from place to place in Dark Souls 2 due to its linear world design and jarringly disconnected biomes, made the whole game feel more disposable. You did an area and you moved on. Why go back? There's nothing more for you there anymore. On to the next tiny area with its generic big guy in armor boss fight. And here's the thing, I don't want to rag on Dark Souls 2 too hard because it did some really great stuff. It had functional online, multi-directional rolling, a dual wield system that actually, exists. The areas had some really good graphical design too. First reaching Archdragon Peak or Heidi's Tower of Flame always took my breath away. But it wasn't Dark Souls 1, and it couldn't be, no matter what it tried. I respected FromSoft for not just circle jerking the roots of the series, but marketing a game with more methodical combat, a more linear world, and an entirely unrelated story as a sequel to their monster hit was a colossal misfire in my humble opinion. Another thing that Dark Souls 2 did, which I don't wholly agree with, was lean into the whole prepare to die business. The main game was fine, except for the Shrine of Amana, but every Souls game needs one testicle manglingly frustrating area. But the DLC was a huge step up in difficulty. Don't get me wrong, those 3 DLCs were much more well laid out, more thematically cohesive, more like Dark Souls 1 in many respects, but at the same time shit like the Iron Passage or the King's Pets were just not fun. Harsh but fair seemed to go out the window a little here in favour of emphasising the whole Dark Souls is hard meme. Anywho, next up is Bloodborne. This is a game I love as much as I hate, and I'm constantly frustrated by how for everything this game gets right, there seems to be a misstep so violent that it results in a pair of broken ankles and severe PTSD. Cards on the table, this game nails it when it comes to the isolated horror game atmosphere. The oppressive streets of Yharnam and warped landscapes of the Nightmare are more terrifying than 90% of what Steam's so-called horror games can vomit forth. The combat is also more fluid than in any other Souls game, including number 3, and while I prefer the more methodical approach granted by those games, there is definitely something to be said for the high-octane hack and slash on offer here. That said, this game's bugbears are, for me at least, big ones. The RPG mechanics are stripped back to practically nothing, leaving the player with little more than pick either a strength or skill weapon and pour points into that stat. The spells are borderline unusable due to costing vast quantities of bullets, and armour does nothing but make you look dapper, and the weapon pool, though individually awesome, is limited to put it politely. Most of the NPCs lack any real story, making it hard to become attached, and for the love of God don't get me started on the Chalice dungeons. And yet, compared even to the almighty Dark Souls 1, the boss fights are generally really impressive and memorable. The world is tightly designed, and the lore, although perhaps a little too convoluted, is deep as a well and twice as slimy. Overall, despite its huge flaws and annoying console exclusivity, I consider Bloodborne to be the best thing From have done since the original Dark Souls, which I guess spoils my opinion on Dark Souls 3 before we even get there, so I might as well get to that now. Dark Souls 3 tries so hard and gets so far, but in the end it doesn't even matter. Visually, obviously, it is spectacular. I actually had to buy a new graphics card for my PC to handle this game, and for all the complaining I'm about to do, I don't regret it. FromSoft, even in their worst moments, have always had spectacular attention to detail, and the sheer amount that is going on in any given screenshot you can find of Dark Souls 3 is proof of this. The combat too is probably my favourite of the series. As I said earlier, perhaps it isn't as fluid and hectic as what Bloodborne offers, but it makes a happy medium between that and the plodding combat of the earlier Souls games, with every animation looking and feeling just perfect. But that's not all. Much like the original Dark Souls, this game features highly detailed, expansive areas, rich in lore and secrets to discover. Much like the original Dark Souls, the characters are just the right level of crazy, or with their own motivations and personal journeys. Much like the original Dark Souls, the boss fights are monumental challenges to round off an area, not a chain of half-arsed pit stops like in the awkward middle game. In fact, Dark Souls 3 draws a lot of inspiration from the first game. Probably too much. Don't get me wrong. Revisiting Anor Londo, finding the Covenant devoted to Sif, finally discovering the identity of Gwyn's firstborn, revisiting the Gwyn fight in the form of the Soul of Cinder, this was all cool stuff. The first time round. But looking back on it now, it just feels like shallow fan service. It's like FromSoft just want to pretend Dark Souls 2 never happened, and spend half a game circle jerking the glory days in the hope that nostalgia trumps a fresh experience. And again, despite what many veterans of the games will claim, the difficulty level for this game ramped up to such a degree that I still have never beaten mid-ear or 3D solo. Dark Souls 3 is impenetrable for new players, both in story and in challenge, and doesn't really achieve a great deal despite all that. The final boss in the final game of one of the most important game series of all time is some dude you met an hour ago who fancies doing some painting. I loved the Ring City DLC. I thought it looked and played amazingly, and the concept of it taking place at the end of time was a cool one, but the ending of it, with the whole time jump, it just felt a bit rushed, you know? I mean, I nitpick, of course. I enjoyed all of these games and played them all to death, but I feel like FromSoft as a prominent developer really need to just up their game instead of desperately trying to ape something that they did 7 years ago, without really understanding what made it so great in the first place. The new remaster is case in point. I haven't bought it, I don't really care to. I've played Dark Souls 1 to death and honestly can't even conceive of how I could approach it these days without just going through the motions. But From had the opportunity there to improve on the game, to remake it rather than just give it a bit of arguable graphical polish and fix the frame rate drops. They could have done something new and fresh with the game to bring the old players back, but instead they were just obsessed with their perfect game and they just couldn't see their own flaws. We all know that Dark Souls, as much as we love it, it was rushed and it was unfinished. But From have been content to just rest on their laurels, soak in the praise and not try to improve on what didn't work. And aside from some semi-successful fiddling with the formula for Bloodborne, they've stayed in that rut for 7 long years. And this brings me in a very, very roundabout way to my point. The Shadows Die Twice thing, which we may or may not be seeing at E3, I actually hope it's not a Souls-like. FromSoft's best games, in my opinion, are Demon Souls, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, and if there's one thing that all those 3 have in common, it's this: none of them are sequels. From really are one of the strongest developers out there right now, but they need to be freed from the endless cycle of Souls-like after Souls-like and put together something new. I'm not saying I want the genre to die, far from it, but I want it to spread its wings and try different avenues of approach. 2 of my favourite games of recent years were Salt and Sanctuary and Hollow Knight, and both drew a lot of influence from Dark Souls without directly copying it and ending up feeling like a cheap knockoff. So not only do I not want this new game to be a Bloodborne sequel, I don't want it to be a Souls-like at all. I want the masters of the genre to take some time off from being pigeonholed, to experiment with other ideas and produce something completely new, because knowing how talented these guys are, I firmly believe they can put out the next big thing, if only given the chance to do so. Then, another couple years down the line, if they want to make another game like Dark Souls, they'll be able to draw on the time they spent working on other ideas for fresh inspiration, to be able to come back to what they do so well with a new outlook, and perhaps finally be able to climb the mountain which they built for themselves back in 2011. Or not, what do I know? I sold Eternal Ring because I didn't get it and gave up on Kingsfield 4 because of its dumbass tank controls, so I'm pretty much just casual scum. And let's be real, no matter what FromSoft servers up next, we'll all happily buy it and sink hundreds of hours into it because we love what they do. But still, I want to believe that FromSoft can prove themselves to be more than just a one-trick pony and really surprise us at E3. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Until next time, Joe out.